And we're back with our panel, plus our center seat guests, Utah Senator, Republican Senator Michael Lee. Senator, we ask people to send in Twitter questions oftentimes, and today we have a bunch of them. Jeffrey Johnson writes in, how do we combat the anti-Tea Party spin from Dems? Obviously a member of the Tea Party, Jeff Johnson. If you look at the latest polls, NBC Wall Street Journal poll, do you consider yourself a supporter of the Tea Party? Yes, 24%, no, 65%. You add to that the overall congressional approval, and it is pretty much down in the dumps, the latest Fox poll at 13%. To answer Jeff's question first and then spin off to the problem Congress has.
Yeah, so Congress is slightly less popular than Fidel Castro in America and slightly more popular than the influenza virus, and the virus is gaining on us quickly. The point about the Tea Party really relates to the fact that there are a lot of people in America who are not entirely satisfied with either party. They feel left behind by the Republicans and by the Democrats. And they feel that they're being harmed by an out-of-control federal government that continues to grow. And for that reason, I think there's something to offer in this movement, this sort of groundswell movement of people who are standing up and saying, let's send a different message to Washington. Let's send a message to Washington that we want more government to occur at the local level.
Elise?
I wanted to ask you more about the tensions within the Republican Party when it comes to 2014. The RNC, as you know, recently passed a resolution urging its candidates to speak out in their opposition to abortion rights this campaign cycle. And at the same time, the party's hired speech coaches to come in and help candidates finesse their message. And I'm just wondering what you make of that tension and what you would advise to a GOP candidate who feels like they're receiving a mixed message and they don't know what to do.
I don't think those two messages are necessarily inconsistent. I think it's entirely consistent to say, on the one hand, I'm going to stick with my principles, and on the other hand, I'm going to stick with my principles in a way that communicates effectively what I'm trying to say. There are ways of saying something that might be less offensive, and it's best that we put our best foot forward.
Steve?
Senator Rand Paul last night, after the president's speech, somebody you often agree with, another Tea Party Republican, said that he agrees with President Obama on new legislation that would impose sanctions in the event that this deal between Iran and the Western powers dissolves or falls apart. Where are you on that?
I would support the sanctions. I think that we need those sanctions. I think we need the threat of those increased sanctions on the table in order to keep Iran at the negotiating table. And I think for us to back away from any threat of increased sanctions really tends to undermine our own negotiating power.
Is the debate that we hear so much of, not the Tea Party establishment debate, but in particular on foreign policy and national security, you hear that the Republican Party is shifting toward a more non-interventionist position on a wide variety of issues. Do you see that shifting away from sort of the Bush-era hawkishness toward a more non-interventionist foreign policy for the party?
You know, there's really no one-size-fits-all rule when it comes to foreign policy issues, and I don't think that most Tea Party Republicans would necessarily say that they're on one side of that issue or the other. But when it comes to Iran, I think most Americans, regardless of where they fit on the ideological spectrum, agree that we can't have a nuclear-armed Iran. This is a regime that has sworn to wipe Israel off the map, and we're next after Israel, and we can't have that.
George?
The Deputy Foreign Minister of Iran, however, has said that the agreement about its nuclear program has not set it back at all. Its expansion has only been stopped for a little while. My question to you is, if the choice comes down to containing and deterring a nuclear Iran or going to war, which do you favor?
You know, I don't think that it's productive or wise to state that in advance, and I think these are complicated circumstances. I think we've got to use every diplomatic tool at our disposal in order to prevent war, in order to stay away from that. Heaven forbid that we should have to come to that sort of circumstance. But again, I want these diplomatic efforts to have a chance to play themselves out.
Why is it helpful for the Iranians to be told?
Well, I think it's helpful for the Iranians at a minimum to be told that they will face very tough sanctions if they don't comply with what they're negotiating right now.
Part of the new heterodoxy within the Republican Party on national security matters is a division between those Republicans, such as Rand Paul, who are very disturbed by the collection of metadata by the NSA, and others who say, until there's a proof of abuse, this is necessary. Where do you come down?
Well, I think it's problematic anytime you've got the federal government collecting that much data on every American out there. It's one thing to say, well, it's just a few pieces of data here or there, but you can tell a lot about somebody when you collect information on who they're calling and who's calling them every single day for months or for years at a time. When you leave within a particular federal agency the ability to search within that database, to search and potentially even target an individual American, I think that's disturbing to a lot of people. And so I think we need some controls on that, and it's not at all comforting that we just have these internal operating procedures within the NSA. I'm willing to assume that the men and women who work at the NSA are well-intentioned and well-motivated, but that won't always be the case. We know that eventually things like that will be abused.
Senator, we have some more questions. Are you willing to stick around for the online show for a bit?
You bet.
Okay, thank you. That's it for this panel, but stay tuned for some misguided reaction to the President's State of the Union address.